Evening, everyone. Nice to see you all. I'm going to focus this shiur, as promised, on the issue of Cholev, milking. I hope you all managed to hear the recording of the last year. I'm sorry that we had the technological glitches, but hopefully you managed to hear that. Now, our sugya takes a interesting turn based upon the comments of Tosfos on the Gemara, on Rashi. Tosfos Divrei Maschil Mefarik. So he brings the Gemara, he sends us looking at the Gemara on Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph. And the Gemara there says that Cholev is chayav mishum Mefarik, that milking is chayav because of Mefarik. And Tosfos therefore gets into discussion, depending how you understand Mefarik in our sugya, which says that in this Shodah Pisa, this case where you threw a clod of earth and knocked the date off the palm tree, one is chayav mishum Mefarik. Tosfos gets into, and Rashi understands that Mefarik is Mefarik mimasoi, which is removing it from its the date is in the cluster, which, as we explained, seems to be hidden in the cluster, and that's enough to make one chayav. For dosh, for threshing, for Mefarik. So Tosfos picks up on this point and tries to understand it. So this shiur is really going to be off topic, and probably the next shiur also, just looking at the issue of Cholev and the various comments that are shown around that. And it's going to be a little bit of a sort of encyclopedic look at the whole topic, even though it doesn't directly draw out of the sugya. So it's going to be an excuse really to explore this issue, because it's an important one and it'll bring us back to many of the concepts that we've discussed up to now. So Rashi in the sugya there in Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph says that Cholev is chayav mishum Mefarik, which fits. Sorry, the Gemara says that Cholev is chayav mishum Mefarik, and Rashi explains on this that this is a tolda of dosh, which is parallel to Rashi's language in our sugya. And I should add that Rashi is in company here with a whole string of Rishonim. Tosfos picks up on this Rashi and argues on the Rashi, but Rashi is in line with many of the Rishonim. The Rambam in Perek Ches of Hilchos Shabbos Halacha Zayin says the same thing. The Rif and the Rosh on our sugya say the same thing. The Ramban and the Rashba say the same thing. So there's really a whole family of Rishonim that learn like that. And Rashi says on there in Tzadi Hey, he says Mefarik Masoi. He parallels the language that he uses with us, like offloading a load, a burden. Sheperik Ochel Mimakim Sheniskasib over Have told us dosh. You are unloading the food or breaking open, detaching the food from the makom where it's covered. Niskasib over Have told a dosh. And we discussed last time this issue of whether dosh is only where something is niskaseh, or whether it's nistar, where it's hidden in the cluster, like the me'iri. Rashi, who learns that we're talking about, as I mentioned last time, Rashi, who learns that we're talking about dates in a cluster, he wouldn't include grapes in their cluster. Seemingly the distinction is because dates are hidden in the cluster, whereas grapes are not hidden in the cluster, as per the language of the me'iri. To say that dates are covered is a little bit difficult. However, I also referenced Rashi in Kusuvas, who doesn't seem to mention anything about being covered or uncovered, in which case this Rashi over here is a little bit difficult to understand how it's consistent. It doesn't fit so easily the language of Rashi and Kusuvas, and also doesn't fit so easily the concept of dates being discussed. Dates aren't covered in the cluster. At most, they are like the language of the Me'iri, hidden in the cluster. So this is a little bit of a problem. Perhaps Rashi would only say this in the context of milk, because milk isn't its relationship to the place within which it's stored. It doesn't really grow there in the normal way, and therefore maybe Rashi here thinks that the quality of niskaseh is needed, but wouldn't normally need this. Anyway, this is what Rashi says. Now Rashi then brings a yesh omrim and ista amri, who say that it is a tolda of Kotzer. And we looked at this Rashi when we were discussing trying to define what the melachot of harvesting of Kotzer is. If you remember, when we were discussing Kotzer, we had two tzedadim really based on the thoughts of Reb Chaim. Either it was detaching it from its unika, where it draws sustenance, its growth, or it was oikrim mimakoma, uprooting it from its place. Now, seemingly the relationship of milk to the udders is not that of mokum unika. It's not a growing thing that's draws sustenance. However, it is its natural place. It's the place in which it naturally formed, and I'm removing it from its place. In which case, this sud in Rashi that Rashi brings, this yesh omrim, who Rashi brings, who learn that the melachot is kotzer, seemingly would have to learn that it's removal from the place, which is the melacha, as opposed to detaching it from its growth, its unika. Who is this yesh omrim? Rashi doesn't say. The Rishash points out, and we mentioned this last time, actually this is a Yerushalmi. Apparently Rashi didn't have the Yerushalmi, or this Yerushalmi, but the Talmud Yerushalmi says that Cholev is Mishum Kotzer. So this is a second possibility in the Sugya, that the prohibition of milking is Cholev. What I now want to do is really run through a family of, a string of Mara Makomas, of sources, who all discuss different explanations of what the melacha of milking on Shabbos is. And it's quite amazing what a vast range of views there are. I'm not going to go into them in too much detail, because to really understand them, one would have to understand each melacha that's referenced, and that will take us through half of Masechet Shabbat, because there's the 6 or 7 options given. However, so far we've seen Mefarik, which is the Tolda of Dosh, and we've seen Kotzer, as per the second Shat in Rashi, the Yesh Omrim in Rashi, and the Yerushalmi. Tosfos asks in Rashi, he says, Ein Arul, Ein Disha, Elo Begedolei Karka. I'm not going to go through this whole topic either, we will get back to it, but Tosfos says that there's a rule, at least according to Machlokas, whether there's Disha, the concept of threshing, applies with Gedolei Karka, only with things that grow from the ground or not. Now, this is a complex matter, which melachas have to be from things that grow in the ground and which don't. If we look at Sidura de Pas, the way the 11 stages of preparing bread are listed as melachas, or indeed their source in the Mishkan, which is from the herbs or the plants which were used for creating dyes, these were both growing things. And therefore one can understand the logic that these melachas only make sense with gedolei karka, things that grow in the ground. The concept of a zoreah or choresh is clearly a ground-linked melacha. However, there does become a stage in the melachas at which they cease to be viewed primarily as things that grow in the ground, and now the chashivas is that they are an oichel, they're a food. And therefore, bishul and oifer, we don't really find a sod that they should be only gedolei karka, because by this point they're primarily viewed as food as opposed to primarily growing things. At which point does it shift over from one to the other? At which point does gedolei karka cease to be a necessary condition? Is a very sore and fraught issue. Is toichin only with gedolei karka? We saw this when we learned to toichin. Is boira only with gedolei karka? Dosh only with gedolei karka? All this is a little bit of a machlokas. There is a nishmas Adam, who does question this. He says, why don't we find a possibility that cooking and baking should only be gedolei karka? The nishmas Adam are the footnotes of the Chaye Adam on his halachic work, the Chaye Adam. So Rabbi Danziger wrote a very important halachic work, the Chaye Adam. He was a mechutan and somewhat of a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon. It's a very important halachic work. And on the in Hilchos Shabbos in Klal Yud Zayin, he speaks about the melacha of ofer and these issues, and he asks, why is it that with ofer and bishul no one says it has to be growing from the ground? And he gives a long and complicated answer, which I'm not going to go into now. However, the seemingly the simplest answer to the question would be that there comes a point at which the history of where the food came from, that it grew from the ground, is no longer important. The point now is it's a machal, it's a food, and it's about food processing. At which point does it cease to be agricultural processing, farming processing, ground growing processing, and become food processing? Is unclear when that switch occurs. And this is the machlokus about whether it has to be gedolei karka, though the melacha only applies to things growing in the ground, or not. So is Disha only gedolei karka? So Tosfos brings that this is a machlokus in the Gemara later that speaks about dosh with chilozin. The Gemara discusses pitseya chilozin, one who injures a chilozin, whatever exactly the chilozin is, to extract the blood, as it's called, or the dye of the chilozin. And there the Gemara discusses whether it's possible to say this is dosh, whether even though it isn't gedolei karka. And Tosfos says that according to, if you assume that dosh it only applies to gedolei karka, you can't explain that cholev applies to milking, because milking is an animal, not gedolei karka. Tosfos then goes on to discuss whether possibly an animal can also be called gedolei karka, because the animal feeds off the ground and therefore maybe in some respects is something that grows from the ground. And again, we'll get back to that later. But either way, Tosfos assumes that the core halacha is that dosh doesn't apply to something which is not growing from the ground, and that an animal, at least in this context, is not called gedolei karka, and therefore you can't argue that milking cholev is dosh, because dosh wouldn't apply since it isn't gedolei karka.
So Rabbi Zobin, can I ask a question on that?
Yeah, sure, please do.
So if dosh is not gedolei, can be not gedolei karka, and it's the number 5 in the list of melachot of Siddur Dapat, will it automatically follow that the next 6 would also not be gedolei karka as well in the Siddur Dapat?
I don't know. I believe so, but I don't know. It's very, very fraught, the issue of which melachos are and which ones aren't. But it's so it would appear. You'll see later why I'm not absolutely confident in this, because of further discussion about whether dosh applies to gedolei karka or not, and how it relates to it. But it would appear that these are linked steps. In the Tosfos already brings that Rashi possibly paskins that dosh applies even not gedolei karka, and when it comes to teichen, it's a machlokas that hits all the way to Shulchan Aruch, where the teichen applies to gedolei karka. So to line up all the views and be absolutely confident that they're linked, I'm not able to do so. I don't know the sugyas well enough, but I believe so. So this is Tosfos' question on Rashi. As a result, Rabbeinu Tam says that the melacha is memachik, and that's how he learns, which is that you smooth the dod. The process of milking a cow is somewhat analogous to massaging almost the udder. It's not squeezing like one would squeeze a fruit or the like, and therefore the melacha is memachik. Now, just in the maths of the sugya, again, I'm going to get back to this view of Rabbeinu Tam where we'll look at it in more detail, but just in the maths of the sugya, it's a little unclear what Tosfos means. Is Tosfos saying that this is the translation of mefarik? The mefarik means memachik, and therefore, if a cholev, I'm chayav because I've smoothed and memachik the dod, the udder of the cow. How would that then translate back to our sugya of a shot or pisa, when you threw this clod of earth and you knocked the date off the tree and you're chayav mishum mefarik? Is Rabbeinu Tam saying that would also be memachik? Or is Rabbeinu Tam saying that there's two meanings to the word mefarik, and he's simply saying over here in our sugya, mefarik could mean dismantling the date from its shell, as Tosfos learns. However, in the sugya in Cholev, in Sadi Hey Amud Aleph, it can't mean that, and mefarik with Cholev doesn't make sense, that it's dosh, and therefore it has to mean something else. And his only objection to Rashi is that Rashi learns mefarik in the same way in both sugyas, and he's pointing out that that's impossible in the sugya of Cholev. That would be one way of learning Rabbeinu Tam. The alternative way of learning Rabbeinu Tam, and this is in the Maram on Tosfos, he says that Rabbeinu Tam means to say that when you are chayav for knocking this date off the tree and out of its shell, that's also memachik. And I don't really know what that means, but I just say it to you as the maths of the sugya, which till I saw the Maram, I hadn't really sort of bothered, I guess shoddy thinking, hasn't really thought through what exactly is Rabbeinu Tam saying. How is he explaining our sugya? Is he saying that our sugya remains mefarik as in dosh, or does he also mean that's memachik? And what on earth that means, how memachik is relevant over there, something called smoothing the date, that you remove its bumpy shell or something of the sorts. That would appear to be how one possible reading of Rabbeinu Tam. I don't know if any of you had any thoughts about that or considered this issue. Okay, so that's the view of Rabbeinu Tam. I just really want to now whiz through various other opinions that we find in the Rishonim, just for general knowledge. I was going through, again, I didn't have the ideas to know all these sources myself, but I was going through some of the Malaktim, who are Malakit, who gather sources on the Sugya, and I just share with you what came out. There's a Rashba in Kesuvos. I'll give you the Maram comments in case anyone wants to look them up. There's a Rashba in Kesuvos, Das Samach, who says that the melacha is gozes, like shearing, and there's a logic to that. An animal produces wool, and when you shear the wool, you're chayiv because of gozes, and therefore similarly, when you remove the milk, which is another product of the animal, you're chayiv because of gozes. And gozes is the melacha of removing something from an animal that isn't the living force of the animal itself. It's not part of the body of the animal, but it's something that the animal produces. There is a Tosas Arosh on the sugya there in Sadi Hay, who seems to say a similar idea. He picks up on the language of Rashi of kol dovashu machbid al bal chai, says the loads that the animal carries around with it that isn't part of the animal itself. He says that is the malacha of gozes. The sheep carry this load of wool, and anyone who knows anything about shearing knows that the wool weighs down on the animal, and even it's often not worth the farmer's while to shear the wool because of the value of the wool, but he does it because of the weight on the sheep. So it's a masa, it's a load on the animal, and similarly the milk is a load on the cow, and relieving the animal of its load. This is the melacha of gozes. That's how the Tosas Rosh formulates it.
I think in the Meiri, the rabbi says that in the Meiri, at the end of the second paragraph of the source sheet.
Okay, does he use that language?
He uses the gozes, yeah.
Does he explain how it's...
who told the gozes? Who told the gozes? The end of the second paragraph.
Ah, okay, thank you. Okay. I thought I saw that somewhere else and I couldn't remember, so I lost that Maramakum, thank you. Okay, just a couple more sources. There's a Rashba later on in Daf Kuf Mem Daled who says it's boireh because you are sorting, you are extracting the oichel mitoch psoiles. From the point of view of the farmer who is milking, the animal is psoiles, and the milk that you're producing is oichel, and therefore removing the food from the animal is a malacha of removing oichel mitoch psoiles, and therefore one would be chayiv because of boireh. So says the Rashba later on. Uri on the side to get back to that later. Thank you, Adam.
Can you distinguish between doing it by hand then, if he calls it boireh?
Sorry?
Would he distinguish between whether you do it by hand or a machine if he says it's boireh?
No, I don't think so. The svara of boireh and the chiluk by hand is because it's not the derech of boireh, and also when you're doing it derech achila. However, in this case, neither of those svaras would apply, and therefore you'd be chayiv for boireh even by hand.
Hmm.
And finally, I'll just mention to you the Ureim. The Ureim isn't a Rishon that we quote much. He wrote a halachic work. He was one of the Bali Tosfos. He's known as the Re'aim, Rabbi Eliezer Mimetz. When you see the initials Re'aim as the origins of a source, you have to know who it's referring to. It could be referring to Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, who is the author of a super commentary on Rashi, a commentary on a commentary of Rashi. In this context, the Re'aim amongst the Rishonim meant Rabbi Eliezer Mimetz. Rabbi Eliezer from Metz, and he wrote a halachic work, structured not in the order of Shas, unusually for the Bali Tosfos, but in the order of Halacha. And there he suggests that the malacha is toichin, it's grinding. We discussed toichin, a model of toichin, in the sugya on Ein Daled Omud Aleph, Ein Daled Omud Beis, which we learnt a year back now, in which you removed with a palm, you get the powder, you extract the powder from the tree, and you get this is a toichin because it's breaking something up into usable pieces. And similarly, when you have the milk joins with the animal, it's an unusable product, and when you break it out of the animal, then that's toichin. So that's an interesting sad that it is the malacha of toichin. So these are a number of possibilities. There are more put forward, but I think for now that's already enough just to give an idea of the range of possibilities. Now, what is one to make of all of this? How are we meant to make sense of the conviction that that Cholev is a malacha, and yet there's such lack of clarity as to which malacha it is? A possible answer to this question is the idea that we already saw in the in the concept of toldos, that a tolda is a melacha b'fnei atzmo. It's its own name of melacha. It's its own shem melacha, and the discussion is which category of the lamates melachas it falls under. So Cholev has to fall under one of the lamates melachas, but Chazal understood that Cholev was a melacha. In other words, it may be that we have the order of the chain of causality wrong, and it's not that that they looked at the melachas and tried to work out which one, what would be the toldus of the melacha, and therefore Cholev could be a told of any one of these six. It may be the other way around, that Cholev is a melacha because Cholev mishum Cholev. Cholev is chayiv as a shem melacha, a melacha in its own right. How do we categorize Cholev? Which melacha do we make it as a subcategory of? That's the machlokus in the Rishonim. However, it's a melacha in its own right. We're going to see here in our sugya later on a very important maramokim with respect to this issue. We're going to get back to these words of Cholev mishum Cholev, but for now the concept is as follows. Don't think of it as a top-down hierarchy, that first we think of the others melachas, then we try and analyze the melachas, and then we try and work out what would be their toldos. But it's the other way around. Chazal understood that certain actions are melachas, but they're not listed in the lamates melachas, therefore they are toldos, and now we need to work out which tolda, which category of others does it fit in with. And therefore the real answer to the question is, which melach is Cholev? It's Cholev. Which category does it fall in under? That's what the Rishonim are arguing about. This mahalach is very precious to me because it's something that I learnt from my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Zobin, and we'll see later that it seems this idea is explicit in a tshuva of Rabbi Zobin ben Harambam when he leaps to the defense of his father around this topic, and we will see that. Okay, so that's just how to make sense of this vast array of Rishonim who discuss what melacha gedulei, what melacha Cholev is. Now, moving on to the core sugya itself, there are several questions on. What I'm going to do now, what I'm going to spend the remaining 5 minutes doing in the next year, is looking one by one at the view of these Rishonim and just trying to bring out certain important salient points in the Mahalach of the Rishonim. And the first point I want to mention is that you have a broad division into camps between all these views. You have two very different machanot, two very different hilltops being occupied by the Rishonim on the topic. The Rishonim who learn that the melachos are toichen, or that's like the reim, or shearing, goizes, like the Rashba, or Kotzer, like the Rishalmi brought in Rashi, or Dosh, like Rashi himself. All of these understand that we're looking at producing a certain sort of end product. That's one camp. Rabbeinu Tam, so even though they're disagreeing about what the melacha is, and they're arguing as disparate positions as Kotzer, or Toichen, or Dosh, or Gozes, nonetheless there's a commonality in that the melacha is being done in producing this, the food, the entity. Mamachik, on the other hand, the smoothing, is a melacha being done in the animal rather than in the product. And this leads to two questions that I want to ask on Rabbeinu Tam. So again, Rabbeinu Tam says the melacha is the massaging and the smoothing of the udder, the process, if you like, of the milking, as opposed to the production of the milk. So the other Rishonim are more heading towards, more focused on the result, the produce that I'm producing, the milk. The Rabbeinu Tam is more focused on the process, which is the process of milking the mamachik. Now this leads to several questions on the view of Rabbeinu Tam, and I just want to share them with you. The first is, there is a Gemara which says that, and this, by the way, this question is asked on by the Tosas Rosh on the sugya on Daf Tzadi Hey. He asks about a Gemara in Kuf Mem Daled on base, and the Gemara says that you are not allowed to milk into an empty plate. However, you are allowed to milk into a pot. And the logic is that the milk never has an independent existence. it immediately gets absorbed into the food. And therefore I haven't produced something which is a freestanding liquid. Now, if the chiyuv is because of dosh, I understand this very well. There is a parallel halacha which is with reference to squeezing fruit. I can't squeeze a fruit into a cup and produce fruit juice because I'm extracting the juice, which is a qualitatively different sort of thing to the fruit, because one is juice and one is fruit, and that's the melachot of dosh, or sochet more accurately, which is a told of dosh, squeezing, pressing. However, if I squeeze it straight into food such that it never had its own existence, then all I'm doing is transferring liquid from food into food, from a container into another container, and this wouldn't be the melachot deraisa of sochet or dosh. Now, if the melacha is dosh, I understand very well the Gemara that says if I milk straight into a food, that you aren't chayiv. On the opposite extreme, if it's memachik, this Gemara is incomprehensible. It's a big question on Rabbeinu Tam, what Rabbeinu Tam would do with it. If it's goizes or kotzer, one can speculate about it. The Tosfos Rosh asks it as a question on goizes. The Rashash asks it as a question on kotzer. At least it's difficult to understand in either of these cases what difference does it make whether it got absorbed into the pot, but at least we understand that it's absorbed into a food. It's a melachot to do with the outcome, the product, and perhaps it's somehow less significant when it's into a pot as opposed to when it isn't. However, in Rabbeinu Tam he says it's memachik. It's very difficult to understand this chiluk. The answer to this question gets us into pshat there in the sugya in Kuf Mem Daled Amud Aleph, and I don't want to go into too much detail. However, the Rif learns that the difference there between whether I put it into the pot or put it into the plate is whether I'm producing food or whether I'm producing liquid, and he learns the Gemara is going on Yom Tov, and he understands the heter of Eichel Nefesh only applies to food production, not liquid production. In brief, I'm just referencing that Gemara as a Mara Mokum. Just realize that Gemara says if you squeeze into a pot, you are potter. The simplest understanding of the Gemara is that makes sense in the halacha of sochet, because I'm not producing, or dosh, I'm not producing a liquid, it's just food transferred into food. However, there may be another pshat in that Gemara in which it's got to do with Eichel Nefesh and something entirely different. The second question on Rabbeinu Tam, and I'm only going to go a couple of minutes over time, we started a little late and I really just want to finish this point. The second question on Rabbeinu Tam is the Gemara in Tzadi Hey says the chiyuv of the melacha of Cholev is grogeres. Now grogeres is a share, a measure in melachas, in all the food production melachas. A melacha has to be a certain significance of outcome, and the share, the measure for which one would be chayev if one's done the melacha is if one has produced a grogeres. A grogeres is a fig. Tosfos says that it's bigger than a date, a kazais, and smaller than a beit or an egg. It comes out from a calculation in the Rambam that the share is about a third of an egg, so it's about 20 centimeters cubed. And this is the share for all melachas of machal. Now, if you learn that the melacha is producing a food, I understand why the share is a grogeres. However, if the melacha is mamachik, what's grogeres got to do with anything? I'm not producing a food, I'm smoothing the udder, and the melacha is the smoothing, not the production of food, and therefore it's a very difficult thing. The best answer, best suggestion I have to answer this question is that even though the melacha is mamachik, what is the significance of the melacha? If I'm smoothing out a piece of leather for the tanning process to produce leather, I understand the significance of the melacha. What's the significance of the melacha here with smoothing? And the answer is for milk production. And therefore maybe it's only a choshev melacha when I'm smoothing in order to produce a certain amount of milk. And therefore the shear is still relevant in terms of the amount of milk that's produced. Even though the melacha isn't being done in the milk, the melacha is being done in the udder, nonetheless the chashivus of the melacha is in how much milk has been produced. This is a possible suggestion of an answer. But again, I just use this to bring out the point that Rabbeinu Tam is very different to the other Rishonim. The other Rishonim are in food production. Rabbeinu Tam is in leather processing. It's about a process rather than a totzah. I'll stop there because I've covered quite a lot tonight, and in Mitzvah Hashem on Sunday we will resume with continuing the sugya of Cholev, and hopefully before Shavuos finish off the sugya of Cholev, which will give us time over Shavuos to do Chazara, and then start a new sugya after that. So I'll pause if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll bid everyone a good night.
Very appropriate to finish a Cholev before Shavuot.
Absolutely.
You beat me by the
the speed of a finger to unmute yourself.
Given the lateness, would it be appropriate to count Yoma now? Or just a reminder for anyone to count Yoma.
Okay. Good. I wish you all a good night and thank you very much.
Shkoyach. Thank you very much.
Thank you.